Hi everyone, this is Chloe. Today I'm going to go over how to do an ideation sketch type of rendering and the design process. And we're going to be rendering this trash can here. To show you the difference between an ideation sketch rendering and a full rendering, I'll open up some examples that I've worked on. Okay. The image on the left here is the ideation sketch rendering, and the image on the right is the full rendering. And you might be able to see just what the images, the size that they are, the difference in the rendering quality. The purpose of an ideation sketch rendering is just to do some basic shading, just enough to show the form of what you're making, as opposed to a full detailed rendering, which can take hours to work on. An ideation sketch rendering should only take a minute or two to work on. If I zoom in here, you can see the shading difference a lot better. The ideation sketches are actually the second step in the design phase. So what I started with is what's called thumbnail sketches. Basically, you draw 4 to 6 sketches on one sheet of paper. And you can have 4 to 6 sheets of paper, but for this character I only did 2. And this is the image I liked, and that became Hillbilly Bob. And of course, you do 4 to 6 of these ideation sketches. So it's basically the same rendering, but his shirt's different. And then once you choose which color scheme you like from the ideation sketches, then you move on to that final rendering. I'm going to do 2 different versions of rendering on this. The first one will be to show people who are using markers the process in which to render this. And the second version will be the digital version. although I will be using digital format to demonstrate the marker techniques. Of course, you won't be able to do some of this on the marker format. I'm going to copy this layer here, and I'm going to rename it Line Drawing. And I'm going to use the magic wand and select everything that's white. Use the box select tool. And select that as well. And press the delete key to get rid of everything that's white, leaving only the black lines. And if I turn off the background image, you see that's all that's left is the lines. I'm going to create a new layer. Actually, no. Delete that. I'll copy the layer again. Basically going to do the same thing, but instead of, I'm going to select contiguous. That way it'll only select the outer white, and use the box tool again. And delete that. And select inverse. And I want to fill this in with white. So now if I turn off the line drawing and get rid of the selection, it's just white. But that'll come in later. Now I'm going to create another layer on top of that, and this will be the render layer. And we'll use this background copy layer and just select that area. This way I won't be going out of bounds when I'm rendering. And I'm going to make this trash can red. And if you're working with markers, you're going to start from light to dark. Again, this is just an ideation sketch, so we're just going to use 3 shades here. One for the base color, one for the highlights, and one for the shadows. And I have this color palette over here. That way I can stay consistent through my illustrations. I always just come over here, use my color picker, and choose the exact color that I want to use, and see it fades from the main purely saturated color to either white or black, plus they fade into the other colors in the spectrum, including flesh tones at the bottom. And I'm going to make this red. I'm not going to go for the highlight, and I'm not going to go really bright with it. Basically, you're just going to fill in the entire image with your brightest color. Then you're going to select the next shade, which is the purely saturated shade, the main color of the object. Yeah. And you have to determine where you want the light source to be. I'm going to have the light source to be kind of up around this area, kind of behind us, shining on the front of this trash can, which will then be projecting its shadow out in that direction. So the highlights will be along here, and as this front door panel, there's going to be a little bit of a highlight through here, where the edge of it is sticking, coming out from where it's fitting into that opening. And also, because the way this lip curves, instead of the highlight being over here, this is actually turning away from the light, and this here is actually facing towards the light, which, as I said, would be right up in here. So this highlight will be right through here. So basically what you got to do is you just start filling in, but leave the area where the highlight's going to be. And actually I said that it's going to be right in through here, so the highlight will not go clear to the corner. There's going to be a little bit of a highlight, as I said, here from that where that edge is sticking out, facing the light. And of course there's going to be a highlight through here too. From where the plastic kind of bevels outwards from the opening. Now on the door panel itself, there won't be a highlight here, because it's actually turned away from the light, because it's beveling down inside. I'm going to fix that up. Going back over it with that lighter color. Wrong hotkey. Did the undo a little too far. And same here, this lip, the edge of where we'd left off to change the trash bag. The highlight would be through here. And as you can see from these lines here, this kind of sticks out from the front of the trash can. So there's going to be a highlight on the other side of that black line. So I'm just filling in where the saturated color will be, right up against that black line. Also, there's going to be a highlight on this corner too, not directly on the corner, but close to it, because of where the light is at. Too much caffeine will make you shaky. Of course, this curves back in towards the bottom. Oh, as you see, that bows out all the way around it. You have to have a little bit of okay. Then from there, you just select this area here and just fill in with your markers. Now we're going to use the darker shade for the shadows, or the darker side, not necessarily the shadow. from this lip that's sticking out here, there's going to be a shadow. Under the slip. And from where this curves around the bottom, decrease that size a bit. So that's how you would do it with markers. Start out with the light, because you can't erase marker. So start out light, plan out where your highlight's going to be based on where you want the light to shine, and then work to the darker color. And now for the digital technique. I'm going to rename this color. Create a new layer. Shading. Another layer for the highlights. Basically, we're just going to stay with what we did before, but we're going to change this to lighten and change this one to darken. We'll start with the highlights first. We're going to use this light gray here. Actually, I want a little easier. Ah, no. Start a thing about making it a little more detailed than I want to. So the highlight will be, again, the light source about up here but behind us. Okay, it is set for pencil. Couldn't remember if I had it set for pencil or not. That way I can just use the eraser end of my pen. And now we're going to go to the shading and pick the darker color. Actually, I think I used the too dark a shade. Okay. Just shading this area here under the lip, adding a shadow there. One thing I forgot to do on the marker version of this is there's going to be a shadow from where this edge curves down inside into the opening. Same with this door panel, there's going to be a shadow where it curves back down inside. And the great thing about having it done this way is if you want to do the different color schemes, you have your highlights and shadows. All you have to do is change this main color. I'm going to add the shadow here. I'm going to add that area for that shadow. onto this layer. The reason why I created this white section is for a technique that they use in marker rendering. It helps to lift the image you're drawing off the paper visually. And as an example, it's what I did with the ideation sketch of Hillbilly Bob here. Have this border around him, helps lift him up off the page. What you do with marker rendering, zoom in on this. You leave an empty space of white, then you use a thicker dark marker to go around that. Basically, you're just eyeballing this with the marker. Of course, with this digital format, I can do it precisely, a precise number of pixels. And then you use a darker color and a lighter color, basically fading to white. And it helps to lift your drawing off the paper. Gives more dimension to it. And that's what I'm going to do with this layer here. I'll create another layer underneath, that way merge down. And I'm not sure if your software does not support these functions, then you will have to do it by hand. I use this outer glow, change that color to white, change the blend mode to normal, 100% opacity, and I want it to be precise. And I want the spread to be 100%. And okay. Now you can't see it because it's white on white. If I remove the background image, it's still kind of hard to see, but you can see there is a white outline there. That'll become more visible once I merge this layer down and do the next step. I use the outer glow again, normal 100%, change that color to black, again precise, 100% spread, and OK. And create another layer. To merge that down. Oh. so I don't get lost. Shadow. Create another layer to merge that down onto, and outer glow again. And this will be whatever color and this is where you'd increase. And I'm going to change that color. It's a little. And that's how you would do an ideation sketch rendering. Okay. I'm going to be showing you how to render a conceptual rendering, which is a more detailed rendering like the second Hillbilly Bob illustration I showed you previously. And we're going to use the second rendering exercise, which is a concept of the Lamborghini Countach EV. I've already finished this rendering because it takes a lot of time to do this rendering. And when you're done, you should have something that looks a bit like this. One of the first things I did was I copied the background image and I selected everything to eliminate. I selected everything that was white and deleted it. So all I have is the black line drawing, and of course that's what this layer is called, line drawing. I also filled in on the line drawing. I also filled in black where I knew it would just be black and wouldn't need to shade it. Second thing I did is I selected the inside area and I added just flat colors where I wanted the colors to be. And I'll demonstrate what I did for the shading. See, I have 4 layers of shading plus, well, my logo. So I have a highlight of 75% strength, a highlight of 50% strength, shading of 75% strength, and shading of 50% strength. I'll turn that on so you can see what that looks like. That's the 50%. That's the 75%. That's where I added the shadows. including the shadow under the spoiler and the shadows on the wheels. If I turn off these layers, you see my highlight 75% strength is still on. And you see it covers up some of these black lines. So what I did, I turn off the highlight. You can see I erased those black lines where the highlights are. Anyway, I'll show you how what I did here. I'll just do the one side of the car here to show you how this is done. Just created a new layer over it. And I like to start with the highlights. Do that with a 50% strength. I just won't put the percent sign in there so I don't confuse myself later. And my ink is set to normal. It's white. I forgot a step. Select the color. Now I'll paint over it. And I used the erase tool to help show how the shape ends up going in back in on itself. I'm going to select this area here. And delete that. You don't want any of these highlights going over where your shadow is going to be. Because if you cross it over with the shadows, you end up with gray instead of the color you want underneath it. I keep switching back and forth between brush and pencil. Brush will give me a hard erase like that. There's no dithering, fading. And the brush will fade it. And if I put this layer to 50%, you get that. And then the next layer I did is the shading at 50%. And because of the way these panels kind of curve inward, there's going to be a bit of a highlight. I'm going to decrease this opacity so I can see where my lines are. Then I create another layer, and when I'm done with this layer, it'll be merged down into that 50% shading. And I don't need to do anything else, but if I needed to reshape it, I'd use the eraser, and as I said, either switched. If I want it to fade, it'd be brush. If I want a hard edge, it'd be pencil. But that looks good as is. I'm going to go ahead and merge that down. And just give you an idea of what it's looking like so far. There's 50%. Now we'll go back to the highlight. Create another layer above it. This is where this little vent that cools the brakes in the rear. And shape this with the brush. Merge that down onto the highlight. That's basically what you keep doing. You just shade more and more on a new layer and shaping it with the eraser. Then merge it down to the actual shade or highlight layer once you've got it looking the way you want it to look. And sometimes if you don't have this at 100%, and you go to merge it down, you'll find that it's not going to do what you want it to do. So always make sure that these are at 100%. When you're mixing down, and then adjust the layer to preview it to make sure it's looking the way you want it to look. And I'll do a shadow here real quick. It's the same exact principle. Shading 75%. And because I want a hard edge on the shadow from that spoiler, I'm going to switch to my pencil tool. And the way I did the highlights, I put the highlights on top, or the hotspot highlights, where it's really bright, that 75% brightness. I put that on top of everything, including on top of the line drawing. And I use the brush, and I made it pretty small. And because my hands are shaky due to a lot of caffeine, I use the pen tool and once I have the shape of the line that I want, just right-click on it, go to stroke path, simulate pressure, yeah, it won't draw where if you only have one area selected. Okay. Stroke path, had it on brush, yes, you can do it with the eraser too. Brush and simulate pressure. I delete that path. See how it has that nice smooth highlight edge. But yeah, I broke it up. And the way you can do that have that line back. Add a few more anchor points. Create one just on this side of that black line and another one just on the other side of that black line. And go to my path, copy it, use my selection tool, we'll select, select these top two or top three and delete them. Then we'll stroke path on that one. I'll copy that path again. This time we'll delete delete those first three, and then stroke path here. And the reason why I broke that up is because that panel is going to curve inward, so the highlight will not go across that panel. It will be broken up. Yeah, I did more shading up here, across these vents in the back, up on the spoiler. Highlights up here, highlights on the windows, highlights on the tires, and then the hotspot highlights. So right within this 50% highlight, there's a bright spot where it's reflecting the direct light. And then the shadows on the tires and everything else, and this is basically what it should look like when you're done. Have fun rendering, and see you in the next video.